You're listening to The Means of Production, the origin story of WRIR and community-powered radio in Richmond. I'm Whitney Whiting.
WRIR, I think, was really, really effective in creating change.
One of the best ways to reach out to people is radio.
Come for the music, stay for the pithy discussions.
And if you create a channel that can coalesce people, that's how we move the needle on things that really make people's lives different.
Richmond, Virginia is a city full of contradictions. On one hand, you'll see a city that's changing all the time. Changing by doing the same thing over and over again. Neighborhoods gentrified, residents threatened with displacement, and a city government courting outside developers with public funds left and right. In a way, it's always been like that. But there's another Richmond, a Richmond where the community shares their vision for the city and where people stand up and fight for that vision. Over the years, I've seen countless times when Richmond has done just that. And to much shock and surprise, they've actually won. But I'd never thought of community radio as one of Richmond's victory stories, until now, that is. It was folks like Alan Shinsius who reminded me that WRIR was born out of that same fighting spirit. Its existence was never a guarantee. People had the vision, but they had to fight for it. They had to rally and educate each other and hold countless meetings. They had to pool their skills, resources, and energy to get it done. No matter where you are or how you're listening, when you tune into this station, you're hearing a true Richmond victory story. In fact, community radio might just be the city's biggest victory story of the last 20 years.
There were enough breaches in the dungeon energy that they could no longer hold us back.
Yeah, in fact, that's the greatest saying of all time. It was the dungeon energy. Nobody could ever hear the voice of their neighbors.
It was a very disjointed feeling living in the city. You didn't know people that were thinking like you necessarily.
Right.
And this station allowed you meeting all these really great people. And I think there was this huge rush.
WRIR 97.3 LPFM Richmond.
We're going to go ahead and start something off. All you guys that have a hangover, go ahead and put your headphones on, man, because it's time to wake up. Good morning, Richmond.
March of 2005, we're in Richmond Magazine. They write this big article about us because right off the bat, we're making an impact. Right off the bat, you got volunteers running in the door.
And for some of those volunteers, WRIR would soon become a pathway to other Richmond victories, a way to pull on the city's unique past and line it up with the present in order to change the future of Richmond.
Know that Richmond is a unique place where you can put your feet on history, that you can feel it living and breathing as you walk its streets, and that you can then learn from it and move us forward in a better way. I certainly hope so.
Anna Edwards is a local public historian, educator, and activist, and in 2004, groundbreaking historical discoveries would take her work in many different directions. But one of them, initially, was WRIR.
Somewhere towards the fall of 2004, there was, Dustin Richardson. I think that's who it was. It was Dustin Richardson. Somehow we ran into him, and he and Chris had started to say, what would you think about doing some history minutes or social justice minutes or something like that?
If it wasn't me, it would have been anybody else at the station. We were all that passionate about it, and we were all that eager to get voices on the air, especially if they were voices that were not represented elsewhere.
We knew the Rainbow Minute was being developed in that same time, and so we thought that was a very cool idea, and it hadn't occurred to us before. And by we, I'm talking about the Defenders, right? So the Defenders for Freedom, Justice, and Equality. We were a social justice group. We were really just kind of getting started. I think the big work that we had done up to that point had been anti-war work. And for those of you who are not clear, FJE stands for Freedom, Justice, and Equality. That, along with the right of peoples to self-determination. 2004 and 5, that was actually really pivotal for the work that would become the Sacred Ground Historical Reclamation Project.
Good evening,
Richmond.
Through their regular public forums, the defenders were finding ways to unpack the historical context of current issues of the day, and also to connect those topics to something hyper-local. It was through these forums that Anna encountered new information about Richmond's history, right under their feet. A researcher named Elizabeth Camborian introduced them to the existence of an African burial ground in the heart of Chaco Valley and its connection to Gabriel's Rebellion. At the time, the grounds were paved over by a VCU parking lot.
We began to promote the existence of the cemetery along with the story of Gabriel's Rebellion, because at that time we all sort of understood or believed that there had been gallows there that he had died upon and therefore may even have been buried there. We were all very excited. This was like new information in many ways, and because it could be a local story. So it was right, here's Gabriel's Rebellion. This is ours. This is here. It happened here. As the years have gone on, we found out it wasn't totally new information, but it didn't have the presence in the popular minds of Richmonders that it ought to have had. And that became our pitch, right? It's like, you should know this as well as you know about Patrick Henry giving that speech up on St. John's Church, because we're talking about the same issues, right? And we're talking about the two different approaches or ideas of freedom and liberation and independence and all of that. So there we were, connecting all these dots.
And the more they told these stories, the more interested people became. In October of 2004, the defenders held a gathering in downtown Richmond at 15th and Broad Street to unveil a historical marker highlighting Gabriel and his attempted slave rebellion of 1800.
People were interested. For that particular unveiling event, we ended up with 200 people coming out, and we're like, okay, this clearly matters. Well, that's October, November, December of 2004. That's the same time that we're being pitched by people from WRIR to come up with a program.
While many new LPFM stations aired strictly music programming, a critical component of WRIR's mission was airing diverse news and talk programs, especially shows that featured local voices.
They said, how about a half-hour show? How about a half-hour show every week? And so that was, that actually made us more excited even. But also it fit in with the idea that our audience, or the people that we were working for, through, with, intentionally, was sort of first the African-American community of Richmond. So Black people and their struggles in Richmond, right? And one of the best ways to reach out to people is radio. That seemed clear. That was like a no-brainer. Once you said it out loud, it was like, well, sure, of course. So, and this is going to be a community radio station. This is very cool. So when the new year dawned in 2005, we became part of the first slate of programs when the station went on the air. And good afternoon, Richmond. You are listening to The Defenders Live, and I am your host, Anna Edwards. It really was seen as a way to get the story of the African burial ground and Gabriel's Rebellion out there, but then to connect it to social justice issues. As usual, we want these things to have relevance to your daily lives, and so in one way or another, we will sort of try to make those connections for you, and certainly are welcome to you helping us make those connections. And on that note, I'm going to welcome today's co-host, Phil Willeto, editor of the Virginia Defender newspaper. The immediate format, probably just because we were the biggest talkers in the group anyway, was that Phil and I would talk to each other. Co-founder of the Defenders for Freedom, Justice, and Equality. Phil, welcome to the show once again.
Thanks, Anna. Glad to be here.
As I use my best, radio voice on you. We were all giddy. I mean, we were just giddy, right? So the idea of, we're going to be on the air. We're going to be on the radio. And I always thought you had a nice voice and blah, blah. I mean, so we went through all that stuff. Ooh. But yeah, I mean, we really were quite giddy, I think. And, with the opportunity to take our issues and be able to put them out in that way. Not too many years after that, I mean, maybe after 2014, when I really started teaching about the struggle to reclaim the African burial ground, when we talked about strategy, one of the things we always bring up is the fact that, we organized public events, we created an annual event, And we developed basically a media strategy. So we had, and we'll say, we had a radio show, we had a newspaper, and we had these annual events because at the very beginning, we said our purpose was to build awareness. So if we're going to be building awareness, we couldn't have had better tools. To have a newspaper that came out initially monthly, to have a radio show that was every week meant we could talk. Everything was super current, and people could give us feedback and we could respond to the feedback. And we've just been talking about the Ashley Williams case, which is coming up for its hearing on Wednesday, June 13th.
To me, I think what the strikers in Red Onion State Prison are doing is actually really an example for us all, because if you can organize to resist the system in what is literally the most oppressive environment you're going to see anywhere, then we can definitely do it in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods.
The other lesson is that you can win.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that made a critical difference in this case was packing the court hearing on, I believe it was 4 separate occasions, so much so that the correctional officers assigned to security in the courtroom at the John Marshall Courts building had to bring in extra chairs, and were commenting on how unusual it was to have such a turnout.
It was like, how do we know if anybody's listening? And over, a year or two, people began to sort of bump into us and say, oh, I listened to your show. And so we just sort of began to hear that more and more. Being able to say the things that you think are important to say. And as a specifically, proudly left, social justice organization, we had real thoughts about things. And so that was the other thing. We were really committed to not being, we're not trying to be blowhards. We're not just trying to make noise. It was like, there are concrete things that are problems, and there are concrete solutions. There are concrete steps by which, we get from point A to point B. And we want to convey those things accurately.
For folks who listen to this program and think, it can be discouraging in this period, sometimes it's very hard to see any improvement in situations. We want you to know that this is an example of a struggle that can be won. By mobilizing. People used to say you can't beat VCU, don't even try fighting them, and there's now a lovely memorial park on the spot where VCU used to operate a commercial parking lot. You can win, but you can't win by sitting back home and not getting involved.
Right.
Right.
No, it's the voice. It's it's the old adage of the squeaky wheel. Which of course makes you think of whistleblowers, but the truth is that if you speak out, you can make an impact. You can win.
You can.
Yeah. The radio show gave literally, people could hear voices, human voices, talking about these issues and having feelings about them, right? You can have feelings when you're talking to people directly, and when you have guests and have these conversations with them, you can get into them, and it's a very human space that you're carving out, and yet actually delivering fact-based information to people that is so necessary to help people understand these issues.
If you're just tuning in, you're catching the means of production, the origin story of WRIR on WRIR-LP 97.3 FM Richmond. And in this almost final episode of the series, we're reflecting on the importance of WRIR's local news and talk programming, the impact it's had on Richmond over the years, and specifically the work of Anna Edwards and her long-running program, The Defenders Live.
There really was a wellspring of really great grassroots organizing in Richmond in the early 2000s, and WRIR is a product of it, but it is also a facilitator of it. I really feel like a lot of connections were made in Richmond at that time. Richmond became a wonderful place for independent thought and spirit and efforts. It's thrilling to think about how much WRIR was a part of that, because we had so much airtime to fill, and because we had so much allotted space for news and public affairs. That really helped get all these organizations' voices onto the air.
After nearly a decade of working to make visible the story of Gabriel's rebellion and the burial grounds in Shockoe Bottom, Anna and the defenders got a chance to see whether Richmond had really been listening all those years. In 2013, Richmond Mayor Dwight Jones, with the backing of real estate and business moguls, unveiled an economic development plan for Shockoe Bottom that claimed it would revitalize RVA.
It's a plan designed to generate as much new tax revenue as possible, and that is what Revitalize RVA is all about.
The revived plan for a ballpark in Shockoe Bottom.
And after a decade of organizing and educating the public on the history of Shockoe Bottom, the defenders were uniquely poised to meet the moment.
Business interests in the community at the highest level or the lowest level, depending on your point of view, the Greater Richmond Chamber of Commerce, and Venture Richmond are calling for putting a ballpark, a commercial sports stadium in Shockoe Bottom on the site of the former slave market area. Their initial call in August in the Richmond Times-Dispatch had no mention of the historic importance of the area, and there was a response, and there have been meetings, and there have been lines drawn in the sand.
The proposal, as they have it, is so big that it will wipe out the possibility of being able to discover the rest of what Shockoe Bottom has to offer us.
On January 1st, 2013, the defenders held a community meeting to discuss the mayor's stadium plan and what was at stake if they didn't stand up to fight it.
A baseball stadium, the hotels, the chain shopping centers and stores and things that are going to be built, these things have a shelf life, whereas our history does not. And the physical remains of the history that is there and the remains that we have not yet touched. There was a very good piece done by a guy named Terry Brock that alludes to the archaeology that is just beneath the ground. It's just beneath every site in Shockoe Bottom. And we are not necessarily, those of us who talk about it in this way, we're not saying that Shockoe Bottom can't be developed. But there are two things at stake. One is this history that we're talking about and our ability to get it before we lose it forever. And the other piece is process. The way that this proposal has been imposed upon the city demonstrates to us that we have to push back. If they're telling us that because they have the money and they have the contracts and they have the power and they have this, that they just get to do it, and we just sit here and let them do it, we don't even, push and say, no, you can't, or you need to wait, or you need to tell us more, we need to have more information. And that's happening now because we did that. That is happening now because we have pushed and pushed and pushed over the last 10 years. Specifically, the Virginia Defender newspaper and my radio show and all those people who have been doing work, the way that Janine has done her cultural work, the way that other people have taken the stories and created their own projects. There have been art projects that have been done. Those are the ways in which you reclaim the space and reassert your capacity to affect it and to make your voice heard. I don't have any special background that allows me or has trained me to do what I do around this issue. It was a realization that I had a right to, that I could assert myself, and that I could simply speak to it. And the more I learned about Shockoe Bottom, the more exciting I got. And it started with a presentation on Gabriel's Rebellion. That was the start for me. Everybody else will find their starting point and then take it forward.
At the last meeting, did I hear you say that based on what happens up at the Diamond when a home run is hit and Nutsy does his squirrel dance down the third base line, that the location of the third base line would in fact be doing his squirrely dance down the very sites where humans bred for bread and held in pens, and the very sites where they were held in pens.
Yeah, literally third base is where one of the other really large owners of trading operations had one of his properties, and that was Silas Omohundro.
So what do they mean when they say that it's not going to disturb? It's not going to disturb them, we know that. Yeah. But what does it mean? What does it mean that it's not going to disturb any slave-related sites or history? I mean, I I don't see how that goes unanswered.
None of this should go unanswered, and for the most part, we are trying not to let anything go unanswered. So it's very helpful when other people also weigh in and say, you know what, this matters to me too. It's not just the defenders, it's not just Anna, it's not just Kim. You know, this really does matter to us because we are talking about the very integrity, you know, of our city as a people. It just does. And so you should be raising that as well.
I wonder what difference might it make? What difference does it make that you know this now?
It changed your outlook. This is a struggle that's actually worth fighting. And I think if more people were involved, like, we could take it somewhere else and open the eyes of more people in the country, not just the country, but the world, to what happened here. And I think that would be a good thing.
Can I jump up and down now? Because that's to this day. So it's about what's happening now. History is not just then. Now it's all about us and how we deal with things like this. So it's really exciting to hear you get excited. We flipped a switch. That is why we do it.
What Anna was saying earlier was that it's up to each of us. So if you want to form a committee of 2 people and do something, a project, do it. You've already been given permission. They paid the price already. They paid the price. And they're expecting you to step up and do something.
I've been in Richmond over 40 some years now, and this is the first time, and I say in the last maybe 10 years or so, that things have started to gradually burst open. And it is so sad that our young people like yourself are not aware of this history. But I hope that this is the beginning of a new day and that we can begin to tell the story and tell it to our children and our grandchildren.
Those opposed to a new stadium in Shockoe Bottom continue their protest.
Live tonight outside City Hall, Melissa, something of a surprise.
It was billed as the big showdown, but there will not be a baseball stadium built in Richmond Shockoe Bottom anytime soon.
The plan failed back in May when a majority of council members threatened to vote against the measure.
Knowing a majority of council would vote against the plan at Monday's meeting, the mayor opted to pull it. You know, it really was a surprise in a way.
But it wasn't just the defeat of Shockoe Stadium in 2014 that shocked people. It was also the Navy Hill Coliseum redevelopment 5 years later.
Despite a major push by the mayor and local celebrities, the $1.5 billion Navy Hill redevelopment plan is dead.
Our Rob Desir joins us now with the very latest on this somewhat shocking result.
In 2023, it was the defeat of a second casino proposal, voted down both times by Richmonders.
Richmond residents, for a second time in 2 years, have voted no to a casino.
And back in the year 2000, it was Richmond citizens demanding community radio that surprised even the likes of the FCC.
Part of what I heard with that story was we expected Madison, Wisconsin and Berkeley, California but when the capital of the Confederacy shows up with their resolution of the substantive, declarative, it was all done.
Richmond surprises people sometimes. And does that surprise you? I mean, does it surprise you or does it kind of make sense in a way?
If you look at Richmond, this is the beauty of all this. If you look at Richmond's history, I mean, it goes back to every single story about the founding of the United States, but the founding sort of philosophies and practices, right? So, I mean, this is the birthplace. This is where all of this stuff comes into being. But what comes into being isn't some clear idea, right? It's all these people with their own ideas about what they want this colony to do for them. Richmond, I think, has always reflected all of the contradictions, of this place because you have all the contradictory populations and interest groups all cohabitating. Indigenous people who still are here, still in Richmond, and struggling to make their spaces, stable and secure and to push out and be understood. So, I mean, all of the coexistence meant that you're going to find all of it. So, when the KKK even never got a really super good foothold here, but white supremacy certainly had a solid foothold in Richmond. Well, what happens when you do that? The other side, rallies and hunkers and plots and plans and busts out at some point with something that that does change things. So yeah, I think it's in Richmond's character to do something surprising like that in the midst of madness.
Almost a year ago, Melissa Vaughn took me on a tour of what is soon to be WRIR's new permanent home, which just so happens to be in the place where Richmond, for better or worse, has its origin story, in Shockoe Bottom. In front of a wall in the middle of the building, we stopped to read messages that volunteers had written about why this space, the airwaves, and the building they broadcast from are so important.
Oh, I love this. We're better than algorithms and corporate repetition. Because having a platform for difference matters to everyone. What does it say? Even if they're unaware. Yeah. Freedom from corporate overlords and a voice for and of the community, right? Like, these are why our volunteers want to be here. To get artists on air that aren't typically played, to facilitate and give access to freedom of speech on the airwaves, right? Like, you have things to say. You have important things to say. We should be learning from everyone, new, old, and in between. And this is the gathering space for that.
Special thanks for this episode goes, of course, to Anna Edwards and also to Silver Persinger for his documentation of so many local community events over the years. Anna and Silver are both truly Richmond treasures. And thank you to everyone who shared their time and stories with me for this entire project. At its core, this is an oral history. And for all those I did not yet get a chance to interview, please know you're on my list. Thank you to Christopher Maxwell for Reed Allen Chincius, Pete Treatish, Liz Humes, James Hickman, Bill Lupaletti, Dustin Richardson, Jessica Martin, Jack R. Johnson, Linda Vorland, Don Harrison, Melissa Vaughn, Janet Lundy, Jean Pembleton, and Anna Edwards. Music for this episode was from the Free Music Archive, including tracks by Taylor Hope Bynum, Tomas Fujiwara Duo, Lobo Loco, What Cheer Brigade, and Nozu. Find all episodes for the means of production at soundcloud.com/AnotherRichmond and on YouTube at Another Richmond. Until next time, I'm Whitney Whiting, reminding you that Another Richmond is possible.